All right, I do like hearing the sound of my own voice, but you deserve better. You deserve Oleksiy Zayets, who is a cybersecurity specialist by education, but has been participating in various IT projects for more than a decade. And since 2015, has been working in positions IT analyst, solutions architect, so on and so forth at a private bank. And for the past 3 years, has held the position of head of IT infrastructure there. So this gentleman has been around, has done some things, hopefully knows what he's talking about. And the idea is he's going to come and talk about emergency cloud migration and cost optimization tricks. These are subjects that were touched on yesterday separately. We talked about how do you consider what's your cloud spend? How do you figure out? How do you optimize that? We had a lovely lightning presentation on that yesterday. And then talking about sort of what do you do during emergencies and disaster recovery. So let's take those two concepts, we're going to smush them together due to, certain goings on, a certain invasion in Ukraine in 2022 to save IT was part of the operations plan of a lot of organizations, not the least of which the largest Ukrainian bank had a cloud migration in an emergency mode, and that was performed. And Oleksiy's going to come and talk about that. Oleksiy, are you there and are you ready to go?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for such a warm introduction. It was a half of my presentation, but I think I found some new words for you. And by the way, it's my real background. Unfortunately, twilight's in Dnipro now, so couldn't see our beautiful office. But good evening, dear conference participants. I'm really proud today to present result of whole IT private bank team extremely hard project to save and secure our banking operation due to the war incident in Ukraine, unfortunately. And as an IT architect, I was participating in different DR design project, DR testing, DR reporting, etc. But this project completely changed my understanding of world disaster recovery. And this project definitely for all of us in private bank was one of the biggest challenge in our professional life. To understand the complexity and importance of this project, let's look back in beginning of the 2022. Private Bank is a banking leader in retail banking in Ukraine. We are state-owned bank and with state-level responsibility. We are serving more than 18 million clients, and this client executing 2.5 million transactions per hour. And we have wide network of our office branches, our banking devices like ATMs, POSs, and self-service terminals. To make it real, to make it work, working more than 18,000 employees. But let's look on the technical side on the state of beginning of 2022. Almost all our applications were hosted in our on-premise data centers. About 1,000 physical servers we had, which locate 8.5 virtual virtual servers with 11 petabytes of disk storage for storing our data, and 94% of our business applications develop internally. That's why we had an army of IT developers, super specialists in the bank. But before the war incident, we had a pretty classical IT DR scheme with 2 data centers, and the main data center serving our clients in real-time mode with online mode, and a secondary data center we keep for some disasters. And we hope that we had information before from different sources that war escalation could be, and we start preparing our IT infrastructure to reflect these needs, reflect our client requirements. And secondary data centers unfortunately couldn't fully fledged, and we cannot operate all our systems in similar with the primary mode. But even this not very possible, because in Ukraine, in February, we got a lot of missiles attacked all over the country. Landing invasion was also very aggressive. You can see photos of destroying or damaged IT infrastructure and IT network and telecommunication systems. That's why there was no safe place in Ukraine to locate data center, to secure our client, to secure banking operations. And we start thinking and finding solutions. There was three options. The first one, it's relocate our hardware to a foreign data center in the nearest European country, for example, Poland. But unfortunately, the main deficiency of this strategy was high downtime. We need to relocate physically our equipment to Europe, and that's why it can took some months or made some transportation damage during this moving. And that's why this strategy was declined. The second strategy, rent DC in Europe or say another safe country with together with equipment. But unfortunately, the providers who can meet our requirements of capacity can implement this about 12 months. It's a huge time. We can't wait for a long time. And then we start considering third option, it's migrating to cloud. The main blocker for this was a national regulation which we had from National Bank of Ukraine, which didn't allow use external data center, external IT infrastructure to collect, to process and store our client and financial data. That's why we start negotiation with National Bank of Ukraine. And finally, at the beginning of March, we got permission as well as another banks in Ukraine to use foreign IT infrastructure during martial law till the end of the war, and plus 2 years ahead. Before this project, we already had a small presence in cloud. We choose previously AWS. That's why we are continue working with them. And we had a small amount of digital banking applications on AWS cloud. That's why we already had a small setup and understanding how it works. Then small but experienced and certified AWS cloud specialist we had. They took leadership of whole migration project and help our other DevOps to plan and solve issues with migration. Also, we had prepared direct channels to link our on-prem infrastructure with cloud infrastructure, and this time we cannot create new channels due to the unavailability of providers in Ukraine due to the start of the war. That's why it was really helpful. We also shared our infrastructure with some government organizations. Also really helpful was presence of our security architecture in AWS. We use web application firewall and shield solution to protect from DDoS attacks, and it help us to protect from huge DDoS attacks in the amount of 100 and more gigabit per second load before the war escalation and some months ago. On-prem data centers, we widely use VMware virtualization. That's why obviously we part of our migration covered by standard native disaster recovery procedure from VMware, and deploy a solution which called VMware on cloud. That's why some virtual machines, some workloads was migrated smoothly, and we can save some time to redeploy and reconfigure an environment. Another good option which was helpful for us, it was more than 98% of our resources on-prem was cloud supported. We didn't have some mainframes, special CPU architecture. That's why almost all of them, except part of crypto hardware, was supported by AWS, and we migrated it without significant issues. And also from managerial perspective, we have no significant license limitations. We reuse our previously purchased license by bring your own license program from AWS. We use an AWS license manager to inventory and control it. And other missing licenses we repurchased from marketplace. When we start migrated, we requested AWS as our partners and consultancy how to do such a complex and big project. And the answer was, you see diagram on the screen. Such a complicated diagram. We had to assess, calculate TCO, perform business case. Then we need to build landing zone, prepare operational model, align our security and compliance rules, prepare migrate and modernization, and then migration itself by small iterations, step by step, then phase operating and optimizing. But unfortunately, we didn't have such time to do it in the right way, and we propose another way. In this diagram, you can see the number of strategies, main strategies which companies prefer to use while migrating to cloud. The easiest one, it's relocating. It's like our VMC. We just put virtual machines from VMware and relocate it to VMware on cloud by native mechanism without significant effort from our DevOps teams. Rehosting, it's preferred for us because many systems were deployed by scratch. DevOps team had a lot of unslept nights to prepare infrastructure, to test, to switch over, to start operating in cloud. Replatforming and other strategies we didn't even take into consideration because it needs a lot of time to refactor, to redesign our applications. From AWS experience, we have such distribution of chosen strategies by different companies, and as I previously said, we didn't have time to consider any strategy except lift and shift, rehosting, and replatform for VMware solutions. How we manage this migration to achieve the fastest results? We divide our system by criticality, and then each system was split by different type of resources. For example, databases, applications, load balancers, etc. And then for each resources, we have a approved plan how to migrate this type of resources, provisioning, configuration of item, synchronizing data, testing, and if testing was performed successfully, we switch to production. And when we switched all necessary critical systems, it took us 45 days, and it was a world record. We can operate in cloud in 45 days after first set up virtual machine in cloud. And in financial world, such a volume of workloads, it's more than 300 systems, more than 3,000 instances we manually deployed on top of about 1,000 which deployed by VMware standard procedure. 6 petabyte data was uploaded, and a team of DevOps and some development teams more than 300 IT employees without any external help, only with the consultancy from AWS, made this significant result. And only 45 hours totally downtime we made for our client inconvenience. What main challenge we faced? First of all, war, it's not normal situation. A lot of people need moving, relocating, a lot of people under stress. That's why people safety for us, it's the first priority. And people who feel care, they work, they can work, not work better, they even can work. Some people didn't believe in migration because a lot of legacy system, a lot of unprepared system. We made such managerial technique like lead by example. We choose not very easy systems to show example to others that it's possible, it works, and it real made by our guys. And the main architectural challenge for me, for example, was unable to work in hybrid mode during migration period. We need support part of the systems on-prem, part of the system in cloud. Due to the latency and network delays between our platforms, it's quite hard task to cut our landscape such way to protect from unavailability between these platforms due to migration project. Also, our main partners as a payment system, Visa and MasterCard, before didn't support full cloud connectivity, and we helped together to build it in Europe first time. And network management in AWS didn't cover our requirements to manage such a huge number of network segments, roads, etc. That's why we had to renumber and reconfigure all our equipment on-prem to push it in cloud solutions. But the biggest challenge was unpredictable cost growth. When we consulting with AWS, they show us how to proper assess and evaluate costs. We had to start from agentless or agent collector to collect information about on-prem systems capacity, compare with closest options in AWS, and then choose pricing strategy. After it, we can build a business case and show results. But how we can assess this cost due to the limitation of time? We just export our capacity from internal SIMDB and in Excel put instance type in from AWS calculator and multiply by 3 because it was previous experience from Digital Camp. We showed that a number of CPUs and RAMs correlated with price with coefficient. Maybe we can wrong, but we even didn't understand how much. Of course, our management was shocked. Cost was estimated. We exceeded this limit 4 times. Then we start optimization project immediately. The famous 5 optimization techniques. It's right sizing, increasing elasticity, pick the right pricing model, optimize storage, and continuous improvement of such exercises. Let's look into each of them in details. What does it mean, right sizing? Because on-prem, when we calculate performance of instances, we took into consideration high peaks for business seasons and when we use it in cloud, we can be more elastic and use only what capacity what we need, not have to big plenty of headroom. And that's why we reduce our costs maybe on 30% to just align our real needs with capacity of servers. Next strategy was after scaling. It was harder because we need to redesign and redeploy our applications. In our rush, it was not very. We don't have any time to eat because the situation, and we started only doing now. But some systems use this technique as well. Leveraging different storage class because AWS have a lot of services and possibilities to store data. That's why aligning with these opportunities can save you plenty of money. And using different discounts, different commitment, saving plan, reservation, and another financial techniques also were in place. And you can see our optimization results. On this chart, in October, we returned to previously estimated budget, calmed down our management and stakeholder representatives, and it was maybe not lower effort than migration itself. From managerial perspective, we use different tricks because a lot of teams want to store and save their on-prem configuration. It was set up rule, no return to on-prem. Personal ownership and cost visibility was achieved by tagging. We allocate for each resource, group resources, personal owner, and ask for control and optimization directly to them. And every dollar is important. It's a very controversial rule, but from organization-wide level perspective, it also saves not dollars, it saves thousands of dollars. What we plan to do next, first of all, we want to start from building cloud center of excellence inside organization and aligning our operation model to modern cloud requirements. Maybe we had to start from it, but we didn't have any time. Continue cost optimization. We still had some ideas and opportunities to save money. Build proper DR in cloud. We lift and shift our DRs as well, but now we are starting redesigning it and using more efficiently. Redesign applications to achieve more elasticity. It's about after scaling, using Kubernetes, etc., for legacy applications, and using cloud native tools and solutions to unblock and modernize our landscape. Thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer all your questions if you have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. You really whipped through it. I feel like there was so much more there to kind of dig into, just scratching the surface of some of this stuff, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you have-
I try to show only a high-level perspective. Maybe from technical side, we can do it more deeply. And if somebody have a more detailed question, I'd be happy to ask.
Excellent. Well, in fact, we do have a ton of questions. I mean, which is understandable. Like I say, you covered a lot of different topics there, and really just a lot of things to sort of dive into. The most upvoted question currently is my question. So I'm going to ask it, which is, it's understandable that you had to optimize for time when you were migrating, right? Time was the one thing you didn't have. But if time wasn't a concern, would you have picked another strategy, and why?
Very good question. Because from managerial perspective, this type of migration also have some benefits, because our bank, our company, and management had immediate results. Maybe some companies go to this migration years, and maybe it's not very comfortable to stakeholders. They want to see results immediately, and such strategy, I think Amazon had to add in the list of strategies this way as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is actually related to another question that's in here, which is, the migration had to happen because it had to happen. But if it hadn't had to have occurred, would you have just stayed on on-prem, bare metal, so on and so forth, or was the plan to eventually go to the cloud already something you were thinking about?
Also, super question, because now we are doubt about necessary using so wide presence in on-cloud, on-prem data centers, because in cloud we have different models and different approaches to work, and maybe now our idea to try being cloud more than more than we expected at the beginning of this migration. Cloud allow us to have cost visibility, to have no limitation with capacity of resources. We can deploy which resources need for business without any delays, without any delivery of equipment, procurement procedures, etc. And it was very efficient if it will be right used in right way.
Right, that makes sense. And then Yuri has a good follow-up question on that, which is, do you plan to evolve, and it sounds like you do, but just to confirm, do you plan to evolve this cloud infrastructure and really make this the platform going forward? Or is the plan to get back to on-prem, bare metal, et cetera, in the future when it's appropriate to do so?
It's not taken decision already, but our intention try to follow this cloud approach for a long time.
It would make sense, given that the investment that you've put into it already is non-trivial, right? And then to take and go back to bare metal afterwards. I mean, there has to be a good business reason for that, of course, right?
But even if we will go back to on-prem, we will better, because we got a lot of optimization, a lot of modernization works, and that's why it would be not previous stage of our on-prem.
That makes sense. All right, so more questions. Actually, they keep coming in, so thank you to the audience. You please keep sending them in. These are great questions. We have a question here from Bodan. How did you move such a large volume of data? Let's be real. This is a lot of data that you move. How did you do it? Was it direct connect? Was it the Snowflake? How did you do it?
Yeah, we had a number of direct connects, which I saw on one of my slides, and we fully load this direct connects. If I'm not mistaken, it was 3 channels. We fully load for weeks. So throughput of these channels was one of the criteria to order system, to classify systems during migration.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, so continuing on with the excellent questions, Alexander asks, were you able to reduce costs, not just the cost optimization of being in the cloud, but compared to your spend on bare metal and compared to your spend on cloud today, were you able to reduce costs, keep them about the same? Is the costs increased? What does that story look like?
We just after migration, we achieve equals with our TCO on-prem, and now we are looking forward and expect that it will be cheaper.
Oh, that's an excellent story, right? I mean, that's exactly what you want, right? We did a thing, we weren't planning to do it, and as it turns out, it's actually saving us money. So that's a pretty good outcome, right? Another question, actually from the DevOps Days Ukraine organizers. Hello, everyone. That's a good question. It just jumped around. Where did it go? Do you use only VMs, or are you using instances managed by Kubernetes, or are you using something else? What does it actually look like in terms of the mechanisms by which you are deploying your applications?
Our strategic target now widely using Kubernetes. Before the migration, we had about 10% of our landscape automated in Kubernetes. Now I think we twice increase this amount, but it's still not expected for our result. We try to accelerate this topic.
Right, that makes sense. So a couple more questions that are coming in, and we've already kind of touched on them, a little bit. But here's an interesting one from Bala. Do you use tools to sort of maintain the identified RTO, or like how are you managing that?
We use our internal tools to manage it, but we are looking into different tools available in native AWS solutions, like a Resilience Hub, and also we widely using link with our tagging according to different DR strategies, according to maintenance windows, and that's why we are storing some part of information in tagging, part of information in our internal systems, which we adopt from on-prem approach.
That makes sense. So I have a question. We're going to just sort of switch gears here for a second. And this came up a little bit from the chat earlier and had to do with the regulatory environment that you're in. Now, a lot of companies, startups, and so on and so forth, and it's a dating service for snails. It's fine. There's no regulatory environment involved there, right? But for something like what you're doing with banking information, it's heavily regulated, both nationally and internationally. And it makes sense that you're doing everything on-prem, on metal, so on and so forth. And then they just lift that into literally someone else's data center. You touched on there being regulatory concerns. You touched on there being, but was that a thing that you just sort of were like, well, you know what, we're going to do this because we have to, and then ask for forgiveness later? Or were you working actually with regulatory authorities as you went here?
Our view is that AWS meet the highest requirements from compliance or security, cybersecurity point of view, and that's why my personal opinion is that AWS data centers had better prepared for compliance and other regulations than our Ukrainian data center, and we will try to convince regulator to make some audit, make some certification of different cloud providers and AWS as well, to check it and to prove that it will be secure, safety, and fully according our needs as a country.
That makes sense. That parses and actually lines up very, very well with a question from Yuri, which is why AWS? There's a couple of different options. You could have gone with AWS, you gone with Azure, you could have gone with Google, you could have gone. I mean, there's a number of options. Why AWS as opposed to any
other? I can share some secret because we want to look into different cloud providers and trying to be more cloud agnostic, to use different cloud providers, to be multi-cloud. But when war started, we have no other options because we already had AWS set up. We had a small team, but experienced. We had infrastructure connected with our on-prem, so it was obvious decision. And but we're looking forward to use different benefits, different strength from cloud and other cloud providers.
Well, that makes sense. And this is not necessarily a secret either, right? You looked at the options. You went with the one that was the best possible choice for the time, given the constraints that you had. Right? I mean, that's simple. Speaking of constraints and making choices, we had a question from Eugen. When you calculate costs, which is, well, we're talking about constraints here, right? So when you calculate costs, what is better or cheaper, et cetera, whatever you want to call it, to use AWS services or to deploy your own? For example, I'll give you an example. You could manage your own Kubernetes, or you could use a managed Kubernetes service, right? You could use your own configuration tooling, or you could use a bunch of JSON and YAML, or so on and so forth, right? What was your sort of decision-making criteria there for, we're going to use AWS native services versus we're going to roll our own Viz monitoring, Viz CI/CD, Viz deployment, etc.?
Of course, cloud providers include in this fee of managed services some profits, some internal ideas and costs. That's why if we compare one by one, cloud services managed by cloud provider will be more how to say more expensive, and that's why we are very carefully using managing services because unpredictable cost second time our management will not buy. But team start looking into different benefits from cloud services, like including patching, including using some security monitoring, login, etc. solutions. And in some cases, it looks like more not comparing money, but comparing our efforts and our forces, which we use to manage and to maintain it. It makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. Exactly. And again, it's a very pragmatic answer at the end of the day, right? Look at what the cost outlay is, look at how much you're going to be saving in terms of your own work. And then if the math checks out, go with that or don't. Very excellent. Well, we are at time. That was a brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. Really a lot to dig in there. If you're going to, be gracious enough to join us for the open spaces afterwards, I'm sure people have a ton of questions and more to ask about that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, of course, to the audience for asking the questions. Really appreciate you taking the time out to share your experience with us here today.